So in this video, I'm going to explain more about the plot and characters and some vocabulary from page 5 to 7 of your book. Unlike the previous video, I'm not going to go through stage directions with you guys. I'll just explain it if there is any difficult vocabulary in the stage directions. In the following parts, I will only explain the vocabulary and also the plot and characters. So let's start. In the previous video, we've already covered page 2 to page 4. So let's start with page 5. Remember, the Berlin family and Gerald Croft, they are still in the engagement dinner. They finished their dinner, they're enjoying their wine. And so Mr. Burns starts to talk and gives his speech. On page 4, we have already learned that Eric is a little bit drunk. And Mrs. Berlin just stops Sheila and Eric being rude, losing their manner at the dinner table. So the conversation continues. In this part, there are 2 words that I would like you to pay attention to. Number 1 is nasty temper. It simply means bad temper. Eric is saying that sometimes Sheila has some bad temper, but she's not a bad person. So Eric is still giving his blessing to his sister for the engagement. And in Sheila's speech, she says chump. This word means silly, foolish. So in this part, you can see Sheila and Gerald, they're drinking to each other, and the way they speak to each other changes. In the previous pages, you can see that Sheila is a little bit excited, and she also complains about Gerald not spending enough time with her last summer. But in these few lines, you can see that both of them are getting serious, showing their feelings to each other as a couple. So even though their marriage, their engagement, is arranged probably for the business, but there is love between these 2 people. There's genuine feelings. So after Sheila and Gerald drink to each other, Gerald offers Sheila the engagement ring. Let's take a look at this part. There are some vocabulary that I would like you to pay attention to. The first one is weeping. It means shedding tear. So Sheila says if Gerald continues to say something touching, she will start to cry. And then the next word is hastily. It means quickly. So once Sheila gets the ring, the engagement ring, she kisses Gerald immediately, quickly. And then Eric says, steady the buffs. It's an expression asking Sheila to keep calm and not to be too excited. And then when Mrs. Burton asks Sheila to take care of the ring, Sheila says she will never let it go out of her sight for an instant. For an instant here means for a moment. So it means that Sheila is not going to let the ring go out of her sight for any moment. So this part is the highlight of the dinner because Sheila receives the ring from Gerald and they're officially engaged. And you can see how happy Sheila is and how much she loves about the beautiful ring. At this point, we're not so sure how much the love between them means to Sheila. But one thing we can be sure is that the ring means a lot to her. She says she really feels engaged only when Gerald gives her the ring. So what does it mean? You can tell that Sheila is actually very insecure about this marriage and engagement. Without the ring, they are not officially engaged. So Gerald could still be someone else's boyfriend or fiancé. With the ring, it's official. The engagement is official, they're going to get married, and this is what Sheila wants. Even though a while ago, Sheila was still complaining about Gerald not spending the summer with her. But seeing the ring, she has put aside the complaint. So after Gerald giving Sheila the ring, Mrs. Burton thinks that it's time to end the dinner and have herself and Sheila leave the room, leaving the men talk. However, Mr. Berling doesn't want them to go yet. He still has something to talk to Sheila and Gerald. So in this part, you can see the word attentive. When Mr. Berling tries to talk to Sheila, and Sheila is being attentive, it means she is paying attention to Mr. Berling. And Mr. Berling holds them for a moment before continuing to his speech, meaning that he stops for a brief moment before he starts his speech to show that he's being very serious and he wants everyone to pay attention to him. So in this part, we can see that Sheila is still looking at her beautiful ring when Mr. Berling tries to talk to her. And when Mr. Berling asks her to stop and listen to him, you can see that Sheila is being a very nice daughter and then immediately apologize and pay attention to her father. You can see the reaction of Sheila is so different from the reaction of Eric towards their father's speech. Remember in the previous page, when Mr. Berling tries to talk to Eric, Eric doesn't agree. So comparatively, Sheila is trying to be a very good daughter and listen to her father. So in this long speech of Mr. Berling, there are some words that we need to pay attention to before we can fully understand what Mr. Berling means. There are 7 words that I want you to take a look. The first one is I'm delighted. I'm delighted. It means happy. So Mr. Berling is happy about the engagement. And the second one, he says he's a hard-headed businessman. Hard-headed. It means practical. It means that he works hard, he cares about his money, and he cares about his business. Any decision that he makes is for his business. So this is what it means by being a hard-headed, practical businessman. Then the next one is pessimistic. Pessimistic. It means negative. Negative. It's the opposite of optimistic. Optimistic. And the next word is prosperity. Prosperity. So Mr. Berling thinks that the society is going to be prosperous, meaning that the society is going to thrive, going to succeed financially. People will be rich and can earn more and more money. And then the next word is Kaiser. It's the name of the German emperor, the king by that time, the governor by that time. And then the next word is fiddlesticks. Fiddlesticks is an expression meaning nonsense. Nonsense. And the next one, in the Balkans. Balkans is an area in the southeast Europe by that time. So in this part, you can see that Mr. Berling starts to give his long speech, especially about the business and social issues. Mr. Berling is saying that Sheila and Gerald are engaged at the right time, and when they get married, the time will be even more appropriate. Because he says last month there were some miners going out for a strike. That actually refers to the national coal strike in England in 1912. Remember the miners? They started a strike at that time for better pay, better salary, better benefit from work. However, in Mr. Berling's speech, we know that the employers won, so the miners, the coal miners, failed to strike. And you can also see that in Mr. Berling's speech, all he cares is money. Because he says, we employers at last are coming together to see that our interests, the interests of capital, are properly protected. It means that his money is properly protected. And because he thinks that those rich people, one, they'll continue to earn more and more money. And when Mr. Berling is still talking about businesses, Eric brings up a topic, that is the war. And then Mr. Berling tries to express his view on the war. And which war are we talking about here? The dinner is set in 1912. To the characters, they actually don't know World War I is going to happen soon. In 2 years later, 1914. But because J.B. Priestley wrote this book in 1945, he had already experienced World War I and World War II, so he knew that the wars did happen. So let's come back to the story. Here, Mr. Burling shows that he doesn't believe that there will be war, because he thinks that nobody wants war. If there's war, the economy would definitely be affected. So when he says nobody wants war, actually it's he himself who doesn't want war, because that would affect his wealth. And from Eric's response, you can see that he doesn't really agree with his father. You can see that his view is so different from Gerald's one, because whatever Mr. Burling says, Gerald would agree and saying that I believe you're right, sir. So this is the view of Mr. Burling towards business and war, and also the reaction of Gerald and Eric towards Mr. Burling's speech. And then Mr. Burling continues his speech. In this little part, there are several words that I want to talk about. The first one is the new liner. A liner is a big, luxurious ship, and Mr. Burling is referring it to Titanic, one of the biggest ship at that time. And then there's an adjective describing the Titanic, that is unsinkable. Unsinkable. It means it is not going to sink. And the next word is scaremongers. Scaremongers. It means the people who spread rumors, spread bad news and fake news around. And then the next word is agitations. Agitations. It means anxiety, the worries. Mr. Burning's speech is actually pretty funny. He has so many beliefs, but as reader, we know the history. None of the things that he has said actually happened. For example, he says the Titanic is unsinkable, but we all know that the Titanic sank. And then he said that in 1940, the society is going to be prosperous. There will be no war. But as reader, we already know that there was the World War I and World War II, and in 1940, there was war everywhere. So technically, there's no peace and prosperity. And at last, he says, Russia will always be behindhand. But is it true? If you know the role of Russia in World War II, you know that Russia wasn't really behindhand. He actually won the Nazi soldiers. So you can see that this is very ironic. When Mr. Burling is so proud of himself and try to give such a big speech, as a reader, we know that none of these things actually happened. So why did J.B. Priestley write a story like this? J.B. Priestley is trying to build the character of Mr. Burling as a person who thinks he knows everything, but actually he does not. So after such a long speech, there is nothing related to the engagement between Sheila and Gerald. Mrs. Burling tries to stop Mr. Burling. So you can see the word interrupting. It means stopping Mr. Burling continuing to talk. Because to Mrs. Burling, she thinks that Mr. Burling has already spoken too much about the politics, about the social issue, about the businesses in front of the guest Gerald. And Mr. Burling is too certain about his speech. He thinks his view must be right. And you can see that Mr. Burling continues, even Mrs. Burling tries to stop him. He even mentions Bernard Shaw's and H.G. Wells's. These two people, they are socialists. They wrote books and they promote the concept of socialism, which is exactly opposite to what Mr. Burling believes in. Mr. Burling believes in capitalism. Everything is about money. Everything is about businesses. Whatever happened to other people, to the lower class, we don't care. But for Bernard Shaw's and H.G. Wells's, they're socialists. They care about whether everyone in the society is treated fairly and equally. They care about justice. And to Mr. Burling, all these views from the socialists must be wrong. Because he thinks that he's old enough, that's why he has experience. And his views must be right. So do you agree? Do you think that if you're old, then you'll be right? Is it a must? So that's the end of Mr. Browning's speech to everyone. And finally, Mrs. Browning asks Sheila and Eric to leave with her, leaving Mr. Browning to talk to Gerald only. And that's the end of page 5 to page 7.